Look at it. Go on, really look at it. You know the shape. It's burned into your retina, nestled deep in that soft, nostalgic part of your brain that hoards memories of summer road trips and punch buggy bruises. It's the rounded fender of a childhood dream. It's the love bug. It's the endearing, anthropomorphic little quirks, the headlights that look like wide, innocent eyes, the hood that curves into a permanent, dopey smile. You look at this machine and you see peace. You see flowers painted on the doors. You see a surfboard strapped to the roof, heading toward a California sunset where the Beach Boys are always playing and the war is always far away. You see harmlessness. You're being conned, because the most successful trick the devil ever pulled wasn't convincing the world he didn't exist. It was convincing the world he was adorable. Strip away the tie-dye, peel back the peace signs and the power to the people bumper stickers. What you have left is a chassis built on a lie. You are looking at a masterclass in cognitive dissonance. You are looking at the singular industrial triumph of a regime that wanted to burn the world to ash. You think this car is a symbol of the counterculture. It is the ultimate establishment vehicle. It is the steel-stamped legacy of the Third Reich, rolling down your driveway. It's funny how memory works, isn't it? We edit, we splice, we saturate the color until the bloodstains look like art. You want to believe in the Beetle because it's easy, it's cute, it's the underdog. But underdogs don't get state-sponsored factories built by slave labor. Underdogs don't have their initial sketches doodled on a napkin by Adolf Hitler while he fantasized about a mechanized Aryan utopia. That's the pill you have to swallow. The machine you associate with free love was birthed in the capital of hate. Let's go back. Before the color film, before the marketing wizards on Madison Avenue realized they could sell irony to a generation of hippies. Berlin, the late 1930s, the air is thick with coal, smoke, and the static of loudspeakers. The mandate is brutal in its simplicity. A car for the people. The Volkswagen, it wasn't designed to liberate you. It was designed to mobilize a master race. It was the carrot on the stick. The Kraft durch Freud's strength through joy. You were promised a car for 990 Reichs. You saved your stamps. You put your faith in the system. And just like every other promise made by that regime, it was a fraud. No civilian got their car. Not then. The gears shifted. The factory didn't churn out family sedans. It churned out the Kubelwagen. The machines of war. The friendly little bug you love. It's a veteran. It served on the Eastern Front. It froze in the Russian mud. It didn't carry families to picnics. It carried officers to the front lines. And yet, here we are. You park it in your garage. You give it a name. You wash it on Sundays. Success, you see, isn't about morality. History doesn't care if you were good. It only cares if you survived. And this car, it's a survivor. It's the cockroach that crawled out of the blast radius of World War II, dusted itself off, and learned to smile. It realized something profound about human nature. We are desperate to forgive if the packaging is right. If the product is good enough, reliable enough, and cheap enough, we will happily ignore the ghosts in the back seat. We will ignore the fact that the people this car was built for were meant to be the only people left on Earth. The genius of the design. Ferdinand Porsche's air-cooled obsession is undeniable. It works, it runs, it endures, but don't mistake engineering for soul. The soul of this car is cold, hard steel. So, as we start this journey, I need you to kill the nostalgia. I need you to look at those curves and see the sharp edges they're hiding. I need you to listen to that distinctive, chattering engine sound, that air-cooled rattle, and hear it for what it is. It's not a purr. It's the sound of the 20th century's darkest machinery, re-geared for the suburbs. This isn't a story about a car. It's a story about us. About how easily we can be seduced. About how we took a monster, painted it yellow, and called it a friend. The Beetle didn't conquer the world with force, though God knows it tried that first. It conquered the world with a smile, and that is the most terrifying thing of all. Because if a car born in the fires of fascism can become the global icon of peace, what else have we bought into? What other lies are we driving around in? Turn the key, hear the engine cough to life. The shadows are long tonight, and we have a lot of miles to cover. You think you know how innovation happens. You have this romanticized notion of the genius in the garage, the apple falling on Newton's head, the pure spark of inspiration striking a good man trying to make the world a little brighter. Forget that. That's a bedtime story for children and shareholders. Real innovation, the kind that shifts, The axis of the Earth usually happens in a room where the air smells like stale coffee and impending doom. It is 1934. Berlin is a city holding its breath, waiting for the other boot to drop. The Weimar cabaret lights have been smashed out. The shadows are getting longer, sharper, darker, and in a private suite at the Hotel Kaiserhof, two men are sitting across from each other. One is a mechanic with grease permanently etched into his fingerprints. The other is a failed painter who just happens to be the Chancellor of Germany. You are a fly on the wall, but you don't buzz. You watch. You listen to the sound of a fountain pen scratching across a heavy oak table. That scratching sound, that's the sound of the world changing. That's the sound of a pact being signed. Ferdinand Porsche is nervous, though he hides it behind the stoic mask of the engineer. He is a man obsessed with torsion bars and air cooling, not politics, or so he tells himself. It's the lie every technocrat tells when the tyrant opens the checkbook. I'm just building the machine, they say. I don't decide where it drives. Adolf Hitler, on the other hand, is vibrating with that manic energy that the newsreels usually cut away from. He doesn't want a luxury sedan for the elite. He hates the elite. He wants a weapon of mass transportation. He leans in, his eyes obscured by the low light, and lays out the impossible parameters. It's a laundry list of contradictions that would make a sane manufacturer walk out the door. He demands a vehicle that can hold 2 adults and 3 children. The Aryan nuclear family unit, packaged and ready for transport. It must cruise at 100 kilometers per hour, because the new autobahns are hungry for traffic, and a dictator's roads look pathetic if they're empty. It must be air-cooled because water freezes in the German winter and boils in the summer. And garages are a luxury the working class doesn't possess. And then, the kicker, the punchline of this dark joke. It must cost no more than 1,000 Reichsmarks. You have to understand the absurdity of this. 1,000 Reichsmarks is the price of a motorcycle. It is an economic fantasy. It is a mathematical impossibility. Porsche knows this. You can see the calculation running behind his eyes, the mental slide rule snapping in half. To build a car for that price, you have to cut every corner until the thing is a circle. You have to strip away the soul of the machine and leave only the bone. But Porsche doesn't say no. You don't say no to this man. Not anymore. And besides, there is a seduction here. It's not about the money. It's about the scale. It's about the challenge. Every engineer has a god complex, and Hitler is offering Porsche a congregation. So, the sketch is drawn. Legend says Hitler drew it himself on a napkin. Maybe he did. Maybe he stole the idea from a Czech designer named Tatra. In this room, authorship is irrelevant. Power is the only copyright that matters. The shape that emerges from the ink is not a car. It is a biological entity, a beetle, a humpbacked, bug-eyed creature designed to scuttle across the pavement. The design is brilliant, and that is the tragedy of it. It is aerodynamic, not for speed, but for efficiency. It places the engine in the rear, pushing the passengers forward, pressing them into the future. It is simple. It is robust. It is the mechanical embodiment of the regime's ideology. Conformity, durability, utility, utility. You look at the shape, and you don't see the love bug. You don't see Herbie. You see a steel helmet on wheels. You see a machine designed to mobilize a population that is being prepped for war. The Volkswagen, the people's car. But which people, and where are they going? Porsche nods. He takes the commission. He accepts the blood money because he wants to build his masterpiece. He tells himself that engineering is neutral, that a piston doesn't have a political party, that a carburetor doesn't care who steps on the gas. He is wrong, of course. Every bolt in this machine is being tightened by the state. Every weld is a political statement. The meeting ends. The pact is sealed. The dictator gets his tool of propaganda, a shiny object to dangle in front of the working class to make them forget they are losing their souls. The engineer gets his funding, a blank check to push the boundaries of automotive technology. They shake hands. In the high-contrast lighting of your mind's eye, their shadows merge on the wall, creating a single distortion, a monster with 2 heads. The car that will one day wear flowers in its hair and carry hippies to Woodstock is conceived here, in the dark, by a man who wants to burn the world down and a man who just wants to see how fast the fire can travel. It is a masterclass in compartmentalization, the ultimate triumph of product over pedigree. You watch Porsche leave the hotel. He steps out into the Berlin night. The air is cold. The streets are wet. He gets into his car, not the Beetle. Not yet. Dan drives away. He is thinking about air displacement. He is thinking about drag coefficients. He is thinking about how to make a machine that will never die. He has no idea that he has just designed the 20th century's most enduring paradox. He thinks he's building a car for Germany. He's actually building a mask for the devil. You think you know the origin story, a sketch on a napkin, a dictator's demand for a vehicle that could carry 2 adults, 3 children, and a machine gun across the but legends are just lies that have hardened into history. To understand the machine, you have to look away from the shiny chrome of the 60s and stare into the mud of 1938. You have to look at Fallersleben. There wasn't a city. It was a swamp in Lower Saxony, a piece of nowhere chosen precisely because it was empty. It was a blank canvas waiting for a blood-red signature. Here, the Third Reich decided to build, not just a factory, but a cathedral to the industrial ego. They called it the *Start Day KdF-Wagens Bay. Fallersleben *, the city of the strength through joy. Car, a mouthful of propaganda for a town built on a promise that was already rotting from the inside out. You stand there, in the freezing mist of May 1938. The cornerstone is being laid. The banners snap in the wind, sharp geometric shapes against a grey sky. The Führer is there, naturally. He's barking about the motorization of the masses, about freedom through mobility. The crowd roars. They see the future. But if you squint through the grain of the newsreel, you don't see a future. You see a trap. Let's talk about the money. That's where the real magic trick happened. You see, the regime had a problem. They were broke. Rearmament is expensive, and building the largest car factory in the world requires capital they didn't have. So, they did what every great con artist does. They reached into your pocket and told you it was for your own good. They introduced the savings card. It was a stroke of evil genius. A brilliant blue card with grid lines waiting to be filled. The deal was simple, or so they told you. You couldn't buy the car on credit. Credit was for the weak, for the capitalists. No, the German worker pays in advance. 5 Reichsmarks a week. Every week, you buy a stamp. You lick the glue tasting, the bitter industrial adhesive, and you stick it in the book. When you fill the book with 990 marks, you get the car. That was the contract. 300,000 people bought into the dream. 300,000 families cut corners on butter and coal, shivering in their flats, taking that 5-mark coin and trading it for a red stamp. They pinned the card to the kitchen wall. They looked at it while they ate their watered-down soup. It wasn't just a savings plan. It was an altar. They worshipped the empty squares, imagining the day the final stamp would slide into place and the shiny, beetle-shaped deliverer would roll into their driveway. Here is the punchline, the one that history likes to whisper rather than shout. Not a single civilian received a car. Not one. It was a Ponzi scheme of national proportions. The money poured in hundreds of millions of Reichsmarks, welling the accounts of the German Labour Front. And where did it go? It went into the mud of Fallersleben. It poured concrete. It erected steel girders that slashed across the sky like jagged scars. But it didn't build cars for the people. It built a war machine. By 1939, the mask slipped. The invasion of Poland began, and the people's car vanished like smoke. The tooling changed overnight. The chassis remained, but the body was stripped of its curves. It became angular, ugly, utilitarian. The Kubelwagen, the friendly face of the Beetle, was skinned alive to reveal the skeleton of a military transport. You, the saver, the believer, you were left holding a book of worthless stamps. You had paid for the very factory that was now churning out the vehicles that would drive your sons to the Eastern Front, never to return. You didn't buy a car, you bought a hearse. But the theft of money was the least of the crimes committed in fact. As the war ground on the German workers, the ones who were supposed to drive these cars were drafted to die in the snow outside. The factory grew hungry. It needed hands. It needed flesh to feed the gears. The Nazis didn't hire help. They imported it. They brought them in cattle cars. Soviet, Polish civilians, the Ostarbeiter. They built a concentration camp, the Arbeitsdorf, right there on the factory grounds. It wasn't a side effect of the production. It was the fuel source. You walk through the barracks now. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, fear, and typhus. These weren't the smiling blonde mechanics from the brochures. These were ghosts. Men and women worked until their spines collapsed, starved until their ribs threatened to puncture their skin. They welded the steel plates. They assembled the engines. They built the amphibious vehicles that crossed the rivers of Europe. The irony is suffocating. The people's car, the ultimate symbol of democratic mobility, was birthed by the most brutal form of slavery imaginable. Every rivet was hammered in by fear. Every weld was cooled by the sweat of a dying prisoner. The factory at Fallersleben became a city of the dead. Children born to the female slave laborers were taken away to the nursery in nearby Ruhan, where they were systematically neglected until they stopped crying forever. Hundreds of infants died there, just miles from the assembly line. That is the soil this car grew out of. As the Allied bombers finally came, turning the sky into a kaleidoscope of fire and shrapnel, they smashed the roof of the factory. They reduced the dream to rubble. By April 1945, Fallersleben was a smoking ruin. The stamps were worthless paper ash floating in the wind. The money was gone. The slaves were dead or dying. And there, in the corner of a bombed-out hall, sitting in the shadows, was the silhouette of the car. It sat silent, covered in dust and debris. It had no face, no headlights to see the horror it was surrounded by. It was just a metal shell waiting for a new soul. It was a monster that had not yet learned how to smile. You think the story ends with the liberation. No, the grift was just changing management. The ghost of Fallersleben wasn't exorcised. It was just repainted. You thought the story of the Beetle was a fairy tale, didn't you? A plucky little underdog that put the world on wheels. You look at those round headlights today, and you see innocence. You see flower power. You see a Herbie that just wants to be loved, but you're looking at the mask. You're ignoring the monster underneath. By 1939, the masquerade was over. The lie of the strength through joy car, that utopian promise that every German worker would cruise the Autobahn in their own sparkling vehicle, had served its purpose. It was never about giving you freedom. It was about stealing your savings to build a factory, and then stealing the factory to build a war. The cheerful, bulbous curves of the KdF-Wagen were stripped away, peeling back the skin to reveal the skeletal intent beneath. The logic of total war is cold, and it is efficient. It does not care about aesthetics. It cares about survival, and this is where the Beetle's DNA truly hardens. Before it could become the darling of the swinging 60s, it had to become the mule of the Wehrmacht. You have to admire the cynicism of the engineering. Ferdinand Porsche, the genius with the blood on his hands, took that friendly, rounded chassis and mutated it. He realized that the same air-cooled engine designed to keep a family moving on a budget was perfect for keeping a soldier moving in hell. Enter the Kubelwagen, the bucket car. Look at it. It's the Beetle without the smile. It is a harsh, angular tin can, corrugated steel, stamped into a shape that screams utility. It has no doors, just cutouts. It has no comfort, just canvas seats. It is the but underneath that ugliness, the heart of the Beetle beats with a terrifying rhythm. You see, water freezes, water boils. In the blistering heat of Rommel's North Africa campaign, radiators in British trucks were exploding like geysers. In the bone-snapping freeze of the Eastern Front, Soviet coolant blocks turned to ice. But the Beetle's engine, it didn't need water. It breathed air. It didn't care if it was -40 in Stalingrad or +40 in Tobruk. You could kick it, shoot it, and starve it of oil, and it would still cough into life. It was a cockroach made of steel, and like a cockroach, it was beginning to infest the world. But the mutation didn't stop at the bucket. The war demanded more. It demanded a creature that could traverse the impossible. You think of the Beetle as a terrestrial thing, a bug that scurries on the pavement, but in the darkest hours of the early 1940s, it learned to swim. They took the chassis, sealed the tub, and attached a propeller to the back of the crankshaft. The Schwimmwagen. It is an absurd image, isn't it? A car bobbing in a river, soldiers clinging to the sides with rifles aimed at the tree. It looks like a toy, a dark joke played by a mad inventor. But it worked. It was the most mass-produced amphibious car in history. While the Allies were building heavy, lumbering bridges, the Germans were simply driving into the water and driving out the other side. This is the uncomfortable truth you have to swallow. The reliability you love in your vintage 1967 Bug. That legendary durability. It wasn't perfected on the Pacific Coast Highway. It was stress-tested in the blood and mud of Europe's worst conflict. Every time the engine started on the first turn, it was a victory for a regime trying to enslave the globe. Meanwhile, back in Wolfsburg, the city of the KdF car had become a city of ghosts. The dream factory was now a fortress of industry. If you walked the floor of the plant in 1943, you wouldn't see happy German craftsmen humming Wagner. You would see the hollow eyes of forced laborers, prisoners of war, slaves. They weren't building cars for themselves anymore. They were building the components of their own oppression. They were assembling landmines. They were repairing Junkers 88 bombers. And in the corners, amidst the shadows of the stamping presses, they turned out the Kubelwagens. The atmosphere was thick with grease and fear. The lighting was stark single bulbs, swinging from the rafters, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like hangman. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of metal on metal, drowning out any whisper of dissent. The car had become a parasite. It was feeding on the misery of thousands to ensure its own existence. The soul of the machine was being forged here, not in innovation, but in endurance. It was learning that to survive, you have to be useful to whoever holds the whip, but you can't hide a target that big forever. The Allies knew what was happening in Wolfsburg. They knew the people's car was now the Wehrmacht's mule. And so, the sky turned black dot. It wasn't a precision strike. It was American B-17s by day, British Lancasters by night. They rained fire down on the cathedral of the Beetle. The roof was torn open like wet paper. The stamping presses, those massive iron idols, were buried under tons of concrete and twisted steel. The assembly lines were severed by the spring of 1945. The factory was a graveyard. It was a moonscape of cratered earth and shattered brick. The dream of the Beetle lay dead, buried under the rubble of the thousand-year Reich that had only lasted 12 or so it seemed. You look at the wreckage, and you see the end. But you're underestimating the roach. The factory was destroyed. Yes, the roof was gone. The windows were blown out. But deep in the bowels of the plant, under the debris, the dies were still there. The heavy machinery that stamped out those iconic curves had survived the bombs. The body was broken, but the skeleton remained. The war had stripped the Beetle of its innocence, turned it into a weapon, and then crushed it under a falling empire. But in that silence, amidst the dust settling over a defeated Germany, the car was waiting. It had survived the Nazis. It had survived the cold. It had survived the fire. It was just waiting for someone to come along, dig it out, and turn the key. The war is over, but the silence isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It weighs a ton, pressing down on the chest of a continent that has forgotten how to breathe. You are standing in the middle of nowhere, literally. Wolfsburg didn't exist on most maps a decade ago. It was a conjure trick, a manufacturing utopia carved out of the mud to build a lie for the working class. Now, in the spring of 1945, it is a carcass. The rain here feels different. It feels like it's trying to wash away a stain that has soaked through the concrete and into the bedrock. You look around the factory floor. It's vast, cavernous, and shattered. The roof is gone in places, opening the wound to the grey sky. There is no hum of industry, only the dripping of water on rusted steel, and the crunch of glass under your standard-issue boots. The Allies have arrived, but they haven't found a prize. They've found a liability. The Americans took one look at this place, scoffed, and handed the keys to the British. They called the vehicle underneath the rubble a noisy, ugly little thing. Not worth a damn, was the official appraisal. They walked away. But you aren't American. You are Major Ivan Hurst of the British Army, Ream, and you are stuck here. You aren't a visionary. You don't look at this wreckage and see the future of counterculture freedom. You see a headache. You see a sprawling complex teeming with displaced persons, starving refugees, and former slave laborers who have every right to burn this place to the ground. You have a factory that is 2/3 destroyed and an occupation zone that desperately needs transport. But the real problem isn't the lack of cars, it's the floor. The factory floor is littered with unexploded Allied ordnance. The place is a minefield of your own sides, making you have a choice: dismantle the machinery and ship it to Britain as reparations, though no British car manufacturer wants the tooling for this Beetle, or blow the whole thing up and walk away. But you're a pragmatist. You realize that if you don't give these people work, you'll have a riot. If you don't clear the bombs, you can't use the facility for repair work. So, you make a gamble. You decide to clean the mess by building the monster. You find a chassis under a pile of debris. It's the KdF-Wagen, the strength-through joy car, a propaganda tool that never actually reached the people it was promised to. It looks pathetic sitting there in the gloom. It doesn't look like a car. It looks like a helmet. It looks like a steel turtle hiding from the predators circling the perimeter. You wipe the dust off the fender. The metal is cold. This machine was born from the mind of a dictator, engineered by a genius who didn't ask enough questions, and built by slaves. It is soaked in blood. By all rights, it should be crushed into a cube and forgotten. But morality is a luxury for civilians. You are an officer in a resource-starved army. You don't need a moral compass right now. You need light transport vehicles. So, you strip the politics off the steel. You ignore the swastika ghosts haunting the assembly line. You paint it green. Not the vibrant, happy green of a summer meadow, but the dull, flat, lifeless khaki of the British Army. You put a uniform on the monster. You draft it. The cynicism of the moment is breathtaking, even if you don't admit it to yourself. You take a symbol of German superiority and turn it into a utility vehicle for their conquerors. You tell the workers, the very people who would promise this car as a reward for their loyalty to the Reich, that they can build it, but only for you. You manage to cobble together a functional model. You drive it to headquarters. The engine rattles like a bucket of bolts, an air-cooled chatter that sounds like a sewing machine trying to chew through gravel. But it runs. It climbs the mud. It doesn't boil over. It works. You slam the order on the desk. 20,000 vehicles. It's absurd. The factory doesn't have glass. It doesn't have steel. It barely has a roof. You have to barter for materials. You trade cigarettes for sheet metal. You trade rations for carburetors. You run a black market empire just to get the assembly line moving. You aren't saving the world. You're just trying to keep the lights on and the occupied population fed enough so they don't eat you. And in doing so, you save the company. You save the car. You unknowingly wind the clockwork heart of the 20th century's most deceptive icon. The first cars roll off the line by the end of 1945. They are ugly. They are rough. They smell like raw gasoline and desperation. But they are leaving the factory. The British Army drives them. The Red Cross drives them. The monster is out of the cage, but it's behaving. It's keeping its head down. It's being useful. You look at the line of khaki beetles crawling out of the shattered bay doors, disappearing into the mist of the German winter. You think you're just solving a logistical problem. You think you're just clearing unexploded bombs. You have no idea that you just authorized the greatest rebranding campaign in human history. You didn't kill the beast. You taught it how to survive. You taught it that if it wants to live, it doesn't need to roar. It just needs to run. You are standing on Madison Avenue in 1959. The air smells of Lucky Strikes, martini olives, and exhaust fumes from cars the size of aircraft carriers. America is winning. Detroit is pumping out chrome-plated dreams with tail fins sharp enough to sever a pedestrian's femoral artery. Bigger is better. Newer is God. And into this landscape of excess, you have to drag a corpse. You have a problem. And its name is the Volkswagen Type 1. It is small. It is ugly. It vibrates like a shivering dog. The engine is in the wrong place. But those are just the mechanical scenes. The real problem, the one nobody wants to talk about, but everyone can hear in the staccato rattle of its air-cooled engine, is its pedigree. This isn't just a car. It is a relic of the Reich. It is the people's car. Commissioned by a dictator who burned Europe to the ground less than 15 years ago. Now, your job is to sell this machine. You have to sell it to a country flush with victory. You have to sell it to suburbanites who equate German engineering with panzer tanks. Even worse, you have to sell it to New York City, a place teeming with Jewish refugees, veterans, and people who lost entire family trees to the regime that stamped the original cogwheel logo onto this car's steering wheel. How do you sell a Nazi souvenir to the people who defeated the Nazis? You don't just lie. You commit a psychological magic trick so profound it rewrites history. You walk into the offices of Doyle Dane Bernbach, DDB. This isn't the polished WASPY country club of standard advertising. This is the fringe, the creative revolution before it had a name. Bill Bernbach, Julian Koenig, Helmut Kroner. These are the guys who look at the bloated, deceptive nature of American marketing and decide to use it as a weapon against itself. They look at the Beetle, sitting there like a guilty verdict, and they realize that the only way to win is to surrender. The strategy is radical honesty, or at least, the performance of it. While Chevy and Ford are screaming about luxury, power, and sex appeal, DDB decides to whisper. They decide to insult the product before the customer can. It is a form of verbal judo. You take the momentum of the public's hatred, it's too small, it's ugly, it's foreign, and you flip it. You make the car's inadequacies its virtues. They don't hide the car in the shadows of the ad copy. Even if history wants to keep it in the dark, they put it on a blank page. No sexy models, no mansions in the background, just the car, small and isolated, like an interrogation suspect under a harsh lamp. Then comes the headline that changes everything. Think small. 2 words that act as a slap in the face to the American dream. It is cynical genius. By telling you to think small, they are actually telling you that you are smart. They are telling you that everyone else buying those gas-guzzling land yachts is a fool, a sheep, a mark. You are different. You see through the artifice. You are pragmatic. It is a masterclass in reverse psychology. They take a vehicle born from the desire for collective conformity in a fascist state and repackage it as the ultimate symbol of American individualism. But the real knife twist, the moment the monster truly learns to smile, is the lemon ad. Imagine opening a magazine in 1960. You see a Volkswagen Beetle. Beneath it, a single word, lemon. In the vernacular of the time, a lemon is a piece of trash, a failure, a car that breaks down as you drive it off the lot. Why would a company pay thousands of dollars to call their own product garbage? You read the copy. You can't help yourself. The text explains that this specific car was rejected by the inspector, one of thousands of inspectors, because of a blemish on the chrome strip of the glove compartment. A blemish you couldn't see with the naked eye. The car was scrapped so you could get a perfect one. Suddenly, the ugliness isn't ugliness. It's function. The history isn't fascism. It's precision. The lemon isn't a failure. It is proof of an obsessive, almost fanatical devotion to quality. The brilliance of DDB's campaign is that it strips the Beetle of its national identity and gives it a personality instead. It stops being German. It becomes the underdog. It becomes the little guy. And America, in its infinite capacity for narrative dissonance, loves an underdog. The irony is suffocating. The car designed to mobilize a master race is now the mascot for the Jewish deli owner in Brooklyn and the starving artist in the village. The visual language of the ad, stark black and white, sans serif font, ample white space mirrors, the car itself, no frills, no lies, just the cold, hard mechanics of transportation. It creates a cult of rationality. To drive a Beetle is to opt out of the rat race. It is a declaration that you are too clever for Detroit's planned obsolescence. And just like that, the blood is washed off the bumper. The swastika roots are buried under layers of self-deprecating wit. The Beetle doesn't just survive the 1960s, it defines them. It becomes the canvas for the counterdash culture that, as the decade turns from the grey flannel suits of the 50s to the Technicolor acid trip of the late 60s, the Beetle is there, waiting. It morphs again. It is no longer just the sensible choice. It is the anti-establishment choice. The hippies, the peaceniks, the very people fighting against the military-industrial complex, pile into a machine created by the ultimate military-industrial complex. You have to admire the cynicism of it. Success isn't about morality. It never was. It is about rebranding. If the product is good enough, and the joke is funny enough, the world will forgive anything. The Beetle proves that memory is malleable. You can take a weapon of war, paint it in pastel, put a daisy in the vase on the dashboard, and drive it to Woodstock. The shadows that birthed it never really went away. They just got brighter lights pointed at them until you couldn't see the darkness anymore. The monster didn't die. It just learned how to tell a joke. And you laughed, you signed the check, and you drove it home. You think you know this story. You think it's about flowers, free love, and the wind in your hair as you cruise down the Pacific Coast Highway. You think it's about liberation, but you're not looking closely enough. You're blinded by the tie-tie, distracted by the scent of patchouli and burning draft cards. If you step back into the shadows, where the truth likes to hide, you'll see the joke. And the joke is on you. The joke is on all of us. It is the mid-1960s. The world is cracking open. The kids are angry, and rightfully so. They are rejecting the establishment, the military-industrial complex, the bloated excess of their parents' Detroit land yachts with tail fins sharp enough to sever a carotid artery. They want something pure, something honest, something that screams anti-establishment. So, what do they choose? What becomes the chariot of the peace movement? The people's car, Das Auto, a machine commissioned by a dictator to mobilize a fascist regime. You have to admire the sheer, breathtaking audacity of the cosmos for arranging a punchline this perfect. The most peaceful generation in history fell in love with a weapon of mass transportation designed in the blueprint of the Third Reich, and they did it without a hint of irony. They drove the wreckage of history right into the summer of love. You have to ask yourself how this happened. How does a monster learn to smile? It wasn't an accident. It wasn't magic. It was Madison Avenue. It was the Think Small campaign. The brilliance of the ad agency Doyle Dane Bernbach wasn't just in selling a car. It was in selling collective amnesia. They took a vehicle that smelled of Wolfsburg factories and forced labor, and they scrubbed it clean with self-deprecation. They told you the car was ugly. They told you it was slow. They told you it was a lemon, and you loved them for it. In a world of lying politicians and slick salesmen, here was a car that told you the truth about its own inadequacies. You bought it because you thought it was humble. You didn't realize that humility is just a costume. The engineering underneath the air-cooled engine, the torsion bar suspension, that was still pure, unadulterated German efficiency, forged in the fires of a war meant to conquer the world. The car didn't change, you did. You lowered your guard because the marketing made you laugh, and so, the counterculture embraced the Beetle. It became the canvas for a generation desperate to rewrite the narrative. You painted daisies over the steel. You splashed psychedelic swirls of orange and purple over the curves that Ferdinand Porsche sketched under the watchful eye of the Führer. You turned it into the love bug. Do you see the psychological gymnastics required here? You are driving a vehicle that was originally promised to the loyal subjects of a totalitarian state as a reward for obedience. Now, you use it to drive to Woodstock to protest obedience. You stuff 5 of your long-haired friends into a cabin designed to fit a nuclear German family. And you feel like a revolutionary. That is the ultimate triumph of the object over its origin. The Beetle proved that utility conquers morality every single time. If a machine works, if it runs forever on pennies, if it doesn't freeze in the winter or boil in the summer, we will forgive it anything. We will forgive it the blood on its hands. We will forgive it the ghosts in the machinery. We will paint it yellow and call it Herbie and pretend it has a soul, because acknowledging its history would ruin the vibe of the drum circle. This is the lesson the 20th century taught us. Written in the exhaust fumes of a flat-4 engine, the artist is dead. Long live the art. The intent of the creator ceases to matter the moment the consumer hands over the cash. Hitler wanted a car for the master race. He got a car for the human race. Is that a victory for democracy? Or is it proof that capitalism is the only true ideology left standing? The Beetle didn't conquer the world with tanks. It conquered the world by becoming a blank slate. It allowed you to project your own desires onto its curved hood. If you wanted a Nazi staff car, it was that. If you wanted a dune buggy, it was that. If you wanted a symbol of peace, well, step right up. You look at the shape of the rounded fenders, the sloping back. It's harmless. It's cute. It looks like a ladybug. It triggers a parental instinct in your mammalian brain. You want to protect it. You want to wash it on a Sunday afternoon. It disarms you. That was the genius of the design. Whether intentional or not, it bypassed your intellectual defenses and went straight for your heart. And once it was in your heart, the history books didn't stand a chance. By the time the 1970s rolled around, the transformation was complete. The Beetle wasn't German anymore. It was global. It was the car of the college student, the single mother, the struggling artist. It belonged to the people, finally fulfilling its name. But in a way, its original patrons would have despised, or would they? Perhaps they would have laughed, because in the end, the German engineering dominated the roads of America. The highways of the victors were clogged with the machines of the defeated. It was a silent invasion, a peaceful occupation. No shots fired, just millions of engines chattering away like sewing machines, stitching the world together under the banner of the WWII. So, as you look at that quirky little car with the flower in the vase on the dashboard, remember this: irony isn't just a literary device. It's the engine of history. The symbol of the century's greatest evil became the icon of its greatest hope. And all it took was a paint job and a smile. Now, take a closer look at that bumper. Look at the way the chrome catches the light. The shadows are lifting. The face is revealed. It's smiling at you. But behind that smile, there are teeth.